This is a country where glaciers meet beaches, where ancient Maori traditions live alongside modern cities, and where sheep outnumber people by a staggering margin. Welcome to New Zealand, one of the most breathtaking, fascinating, and unique nations on the face of this earth. Today, we're going on a deep dive into everything you need to know about this incredible country. From its volcanic landscapes and dramatic mountain ranges, to its world-famous film locations, its remarkable indigenous culture, its extraordinary political history, and the warm, adventurous spirit of the people who call it home. Whether you have always dreamed of visiting New Zealand, whether you are planning a trip, or whether you are simply curious about one of the most isolated and beautiful places on the planet, this video is going to take you on a journey you will not forget. So sit back, let the scenery wash over you, and let us begin. New Zealand is officially known as New Zealand, though in the Maori language it carries the beautiful name Aotearoa, which is most commonly translated as the land of the long white cloud. This name was given by the Polynesian ancestors of the Maori people, who first arrived on these shores many centuries ago, and it captures something poetic and true about the country, because when you see New Zealand from above or from the sea, the clouds that drift across the mountain peaks and the coastline have a kind of ethereal, dreamlike quality that is hard to describe, and even harder to forget. New Zealand sits in the South Pacific Ocean, far southeast of Australia, making it one of the most geographically isolated countries in the entire world. It is part of the region known as Oceania, and it is separated from its nearest large neighbor Australia by the Tasman Sea. Despite this isolation, or perhaps because of it, New Zealand has developed into a nation of enormous character, beauty, and international significance. The country has a population of around 5.4 million people, which makes it relatively small by global standards, but what it lacks in population, it more than makes up for in landscape, culture, and sheer natural magnificence. Geographically, New Zealand is made up of two main islands, known simply and practically as the North Island and the South Island, along with a number of smaller islands scattered across the surrounding ocean. Together, these islands form a landmass that is roughly the size of the United Kingdom or the state of Colorado in the United States. But the diversity of terrain packed into that space is almost unbelievable. In the North Island, you will find active volcanoes, geothermal hot springs, rolling green hills, and densely populated urban centers. In the South Island, you will encounter the dramatic Southern Alps mountain range, ancient glaciers that spill down toward the sea, deep fjords carved by ice over millions of years, vast open plains, and some of the most untouched wilderness on Earth. The contrast between the two islands is one of the things that makes New Zealand such a fascinating place to explore, because no matter which part of the country you are visiting, you will find something that takes your breath away. The Southern Alps are the backbone of the South Island, running almost the entire length of the island from north to south, and they include Aoraki, also known as Mount Cook, which is the tallest mountain in New Zealand at just over 3,700 meters above sea level. The mountain is sacred to the Maori people and holds deep cultural and spiritual significance. Glaciers like the Franz Josef Glacier and the Fox Glacier descend from these peaks toward rainforests and coastlines, creating landscapes that seem almost impossible in their beauty. On the west coast of the South Island, the famous Fiordland National Park contains some of the most dramatic scenery in the world, including Milford Sound, a fjord of such extraordinary beauty that it has been called the eighth wonder of the world by some visitors. Towering cliffs, cascading waterfalls, and calm, dark waters surrounded by ancient forests create a sense of primal grandeur that is almost overwhelming. The North Island, meanwhile, is geologically younger and more volcanically active. The central plateau of the North Island is dominated by three major volcanoes, Ruapehu, Ngauruhoe, and Tongariro, all of which are part of the Tongariro National Park, which holds the distinction of being the oldest national park in New Zealand and one of the first in the world. These volcanoes are not merely geological features. They are deeply sacred to the Maori people of the region and carry profound spiritual meaning. The geothermal activity that defines this part of the North Island also creates extraordinary features like the hot springs, geysers, and boiling mud pools found around the town of Rotorua, which is one of the most visited destinations in the entire country. Then there is Lake Taupo, the largest lake in New Zealand, formed by a massive volcanic eruption thousands of years ago, and now a stunning expanse of clear blue water in the heart of the North Island. New Zealand is also home to some of the most unique wildlife in the world, much of which evolved in complete isolation over millions of years and is found nowhere else on Earth. The most famous of all is the kiwi, a small, flightless, nocturnal bird that has become the national symbol of New Zealand and the reason why New Zealanders themselves are affectionately known around the world as kiwis. The kiwi is a remarkable creature, more closely related to the now extinct elephant bird of Madagascar than to any of its island neighbors, and it lays eggs that are enormous relative to its body size. Unfortunately, the kiwi is now an endangered species, threatened by introduced predators like stoats, rats, and possums, Considerable conservation efforts are underway to protect and restore its population. Other unique wildlife includes the tuatara, a reptile that has survived virtually unchanged for over 200 million years and is often described as a living fossil. The weta, a large insect that fills the ecological niche occupied by small mammals in other parts of the world. And the kakapo, a critically endangered flightless parrot that is the heaviest parrot in the world and one of the longest-lived birds on Earth. New Zealand is also famous around the world as a filming location. And perhaps no film series has done more to bring global attention to the country than Peter Jackson and his team adaptations of J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King, followed later by the Hobbit trilogy, transformed New Zealand into the real-world Middle-earth, showcasing its landscapes to hundreds of millions of viewers worldwide and sparking a massive tourism industry centered on visiting the locations where these films were made. From the rolling green hills of Matamata, where the Hobbiton film set was built and still welcomes visitors today, to the volcanic plateau of Tongariro, which doubled as the Mordor landscape, to the dramatic mountains and fjords of the South Island, New Zealand proved to be the perfect stand-in for Tolkien mythical world. And the country has embraced this connection with warmth and pride ever since. Now let us talk about the cities of New Zealand, because while the natural landscapes often steal the headlines, the urban centers of this country are vibrant, cosmopolitan, and full of life. The capital city of New Zealand is Wellington, located at the southern tip of the North Island, overlooking Cook Strait, which is the body of water that separates the two main islands. Wellington is a compact, hilly, and famously windy city, which has earned it the nickname Windy Wellington, though its residents would be quick to tell you that the wind is merely character. As the political and cultural heart of the country, Wellington is home to the New Zealand Parliament, known as the Beehive, due to the distinctive shape of its executive wing, as well as a remarkable concentration of museums, galleries, theaters, restaurants, and cafes. Te Papa Tongarewa, the Museum of New Zealand, is located on Wellington waterfront and is widely regarded as one of the finest museums in the Asia-Pacific region, telling the story of New Zealand from its geological origins to its contemporary multicultural identity with extraordinary depth and care. The largest city in New Zealand is Auckland, located on the North Island and sitting on a narrow isthmus between two harbors, with the Waitemata Harbor to the east and the Manukau Harbor to the west. Auckland is sometimes called the City of Sails because of the extraordinary number of sailing boats that fill its waters on any given weekend, and it is home to around a third of the entire population of New Zealand, making it by far the most populated urban center in the country. Auckland is New Zealand's economic powerhouse, its main international gateway, and its most diverse city, with large communities of Pacific Islanders and Asian New Zealanders alongside the European and Maori populations that have historically defined the country. The skyline of Auckland is dominated by the Sky Tower, a telecommunications and observation tower that stands 328 meters tall and offers panoramic views across the city and the surrounding coastline. Further south, on the South Island, sits Christchurch, New Zealand's second largest city and the gateway to the South Island remarkable natural landscape. Christchurch has long been known for its English character, its formal gardens, its Gothic Revival architecture, and its strong connection to the heritage of the British settlers who founded it in the 19th century. However, the city was devastated by a series of powerful earthquakes in 2010 and 2011, the most destructive of which killed 185 people and caused catastrophic damage to the city center. The rebuild of Christchurch has been a long, complex, and sometimes painful process, but it has also been an opportunity for the city to reimagine itself. And today, Christchurch is a fascinating blend of the old and the new, with innovative contemporary architecture sitting alongside carefully restored heritage buildings and a renewed sense of community pride. To understand New Zealand fully, you have to understand its people and their extraordinary diversity. The population of around 5.4 million is predominantly urban, with roughly 80% of New Zealanders living in cities and towns rather than in the countryside, despite the national overwhelming association with rural landscapes and farm life. The largest ethnic group is of European descent, primarily British in origin, reflecting the national colonial history, but New Zealand is far more than a single cultural story. The Maori people are the indigenous Polynesian inhabitants of New Zealand, and their culture, language, and worldview are woven into the very fabric of the nation in a way that distinguishes New Zealand from many other former British colonies. Maori culture is not a museum piece or a historical artifact. It is a living, evolving, and vital part of contemporary New Zealand life, visible in everything from the haka performed by the national rugby team, before every match, to the Maori words and phrases embedded in everyday English conversation, to the growing movement to restore the Maori language to full everyday use. Speaking of languages, New Zealand has 3 official languages: English, Maori, and New Zealand Sign Language. English is by far the most widely spoken. But the status of Maori as an official language reflects a broader commitment by the New Zealand government and society to honor the Treaty of Waitangi and to support Maori cultural and linguistic revival. The Maori language, known as Te Reo Maori, experienced a dramatic decline during the 20th century as assimilation policies discouraged its use. But since the 1970s, there has been a powerful revitalization movement, supported by the establishment of Maori language preschools called Kohanga Reo, Maori language schools, and a dedicated Maori television channel. Today, Te Reo Maori is heard in Parliament, in schools, on radio and television, in sports commentary, and in daily greetings, and the number of speakers is slowly but steadily growing. The history of New Zealand is one of the most fascinating and, in some ways, most instructive in the world because it tells the story of how an extraordinary indigenous civilization encountered the forces of European colonialism and how the resulting nation has struggled and continues to struggle to reconcile that history with a commitment to justice and partnership. The Maori people arrived in New Zealand from Polynesia, most likely from the region of eastern Polynesia that includes the Cook Islands and French Polynesia, in a series of voyages conducted over several centuries, with the earliest arrivals estimated to have reached the islands around 1000 CE, though some accounts place it somewhat later. They came in large double-hulled canoes called waka, navigating across thousands of kilometers of open ocean using the stars, the currents, the winds, and the birds, and they brought with them plants, animals, and a rich cultural tradition that would adapt and flourish in their new island home. Over the centuries that followed, the Maori developed a complex and sophisticated society organized around tribal groupings called iwi and hapu, each with its own territory, its own traditions, and its own leaders. They built fortified villages called pa, developed elaborate systems of carving, weaving, and tattooing, and created a rich oral tradition of song, story, and genealogy that preserved their history and connected them to their ancestors and to the land. The concept of mana, a kind of spiritual power and social authority, and the concept of tapu, which is the origin of the English word taboo, were central to Maori social and spiritual life, as was the deep sense of kaitiakitanga, or guardianship, toward the natural world. The first European to sight New Zealand was the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman, who arrived in 1642 but did not land, due to a violent confrontation with Maori in which several of his crew members were killed. It was not until 1769 that the next European arrival of significance took place, when the British explorer James Cook sailed the length of both main islands, making detailed charts and establishing contact with Maori communities across the country. Cook voyages opened the way for increasing European interest in New Zealand, and over the following decades the country attracted whalers, sealers, traders, and missionaries whose interactions with Maori communities had profound and often devastating consequences in terms of the introduction of disease, alcohol, and firearms. The pivotal moment in New Zealand colonial history came in 1840 with the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, a document negotiated between the British Crown and a large number of Maori chiefs that is considered the founding document of the New Zealand nation. The treaty promised Maori chiefs sovereignty over their lands, forests, fisheries, and other taonga, or treasures, in exchange for granting the Crown the right of governance and British subjectship to Maori. However, the English and Maori versions of the treaty differed significantly in their language and meaning, and the decades that followed saw widespread breaches of the treaty by the Crown, including the confiscation of vast areas of Maori land through wars and legislation. The consequences of these breaches have shaped New Zealand society profoundly, and the process of treaty settlement, through which the government acknowledges historical grievances and provides redress to Maori iwi, continues to this day. New Zealand gradually moved toward greater autonomy from Britain throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, gaining full sovereignty in 1947. Along the way, it established a reputation as one of the most progressive and forward-thinking nations in the world. In 1893, New Zealand became the first self-governing country in the world to grant women the right to vote in national elections, a landmark achievement led by the tireless campaigning of Kate Shepherd and thousands of other women who signed petitions demanding equal political rights. This achievement remains a source of enormous national pride, and it set a tone of social progressivism that New Zealand has continued to uphold in many areas of public policy ever since. The government of New Zealand today is a constitutional monarchy and a parliamentary democracy. The head of state is King Charles III, who is represented in New Zealand by a Governor-General, but this role is largely ceremonial, and the real power of government rests with the Prime Minister and the Parliament. Elections are held every 3 years under a mixed-member proportional voting system, which was adopted in 1996, and gives voters more representative outcomes by combining electorate seats, where individual candidates compete in local contests, with party list seats, which are allocated in proportion to each party overall share of the national vote. This system has encouraged a more diverse parliament and has given smaller parties a greater voice in government, And New Zealand regularly ranks among the least corrupt and most democratic countries in the world. The economy of New Zealand is a developed, market-based economy with a strong emphasis on agriculture, tourism, and increasingly, technology and creative industries. Agriculture has historically been the foundation of the New Zealand economy, and the country remains one of the world's largest exporters of dairy products, meat, wool, and fruit. The dairy industry in particular is enormous, dominated by the cooperative Fonterra, which is one of the largest dairy companies in the world and processes around 80% of all the milk produced in New Zealand. Sheep farming, once the absolute cornerstone of the New Zealand economy, has declined somewhat in recent decades as wool prices have fallen and beef and dairy farming have become more profitable, but the country still has far more sheep than people, with a sheep population of around 5 million, making the famous joke about New Zealand and sheep entirely grounded in statistical reality. Tourism is another enormously important part of the New Zealand economy, drawing visitors from around the world who come to experience the landscapes, the adventure activities, the Maori culture, and the famously clean and green environment. New Zealand has positioned itself as a premium destination for ecotourism, adventure tourism, and cultural tourism, and the country consistently ranks among the most desirable travel destinations in the world. The film industry, boosted enormously by the Lord of the Rings productions and the ongoing work of Wellington-based Weta Workshop and Weta Digital, has also become a significant contributor to the New Zealand economy, bringing international productions to the country and building a local industry of extraordinary technical skill and creativity. Weta Workshop, founded by director Peter Jackson and his collaborators, is now one of the most respected special effects and prop-making companies in the world, having contributed to films and television productions far beyond the Middle-earth franchise. Daily life in New Zealand is generally characterized by a high standard of living, a strong public health system, a well-regarded education system, and a culture that values outdoor activity, community, and a certain relaxed self-confidence that New Zealanders themselves call "things will work out fine," meaning that things will generally work out fine. New Zealanders are known internationally for their warmth, their sense of humor, their directness, and their love of sport, particularly rugby union, which is not merely a national sport, but something close to a national religion. The country is safe by international standards, with relatively low rates of violent crime, and it regularly performs well in international rankings for quality of life, environmental health, and social cohesion. However, it also faces significant challenges, including a housing affordability crisis, particularly in Auckland, where property prices have risen to levels that make homeownership extremely difficult for many people, and a long-standing phenomenon of emigration to Australia, where wages in many sectors are higher and the cost of living can be somewhat lower. The culture of New Zealand is a rich and layered thing, shaped by Maori traditions, British colonial heritage, Pacific Island influences, and a growing Asian cultural presence, all mixing together in a society that is still in many ways working out what it means and wants to be. Maori culture is central to the New Zealand national identity in a way that is genuinely distinctive. The haka, a powerful traditional Maori performance involving chanting, stamping, and vigorous movement of the body, is known around the world primarily through the performances of the All Blacks, the New Zealand national rugby team, who perform a haka before every international match as a challenge to their opponents and an expression of their identity. The haka is not merely a sporting ritual. It is a deeply meaningful cultural practice used at many important occasions in Maori life, including welcomes, funerals, celebrations, and moments of great significance, and its adoption by the All Blacks represents one of the most visible symbols of the integration of Maori culture into mainstream New Zealand life. Rugby union is indeed the sport that defines New Zealand more than any other, and the All Blacks are not just a sports team, but a national institution. New Zealand has one of the highest winning percentages of any national sports team in any sport in the world, and the All Blacks have won the Rugby World Cup 3 times. The intensity of New Zealand's passion for rugby is hard to overstate. It cuts across class, ethnicity, and geography in a way that few other things in New Zealand life can match. And on the days when the All Blacks are playing, the country tends to pause and watch together. Before we wrap up, let us share some fun facts about New Zealand that capture just a little more of what makes this country so special and surprising. New Zealand has more sheep than people, a ratio that has actually shrunk considerably from its historic high, but still stands at roughly 5 million sheep for a population of 5 million people. New Zealand is consistently ranked as one of the least corrupt countries in the world, sitting near the very top of Transparency International Annual Corruption Perceptions Index, alongside countries like Denmark and Finland. The country has extraordinarily clean air and water compared to most of the world, as in its natural environment, while threatened by introduced species and agricultural runoff, retains a quality and beauty that is increasingly rare on a crowded planet. New Zealand night skies, particularly in the South Island, are among the darkest and most spectacular in the world, drawing astronomers and stargazers from around the globe, and large areas of the South Island have been designated as international dark sky reserves to protect them from light pollution. And then there is Queenstown, a small but internationally renowned town on the shores of Lake Wakatipu in the South Island, which has earned the title of Adventure Capital of the World by offering bungee jumping, skydiving, jet boating, skiing, and dozens of other extreme activities in a setting of jaw-dropping mountain and lake scenery. One more thing worth exploring before we close is the remarkable international reputation that New Zealand has built as a leader in environmental protection and clean, green living. New Zealand was one of the first countries in the world to establish a national park system, and today, more than a third of the total land area of the country is protected in national parks, conservation areas, and reserves. The country has pledged ambitious goals around reducing carbon emissions and transitioning to renewable energy, and it already generates the vast majority of its electricity from renewable sources, primarily hydroelectric power, geothermal energy, and wind. The zero-carbon legislation passed in 2019 set legally binding targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reflecting a broad public and political commitment to taking climate change seriously. That said, New Zealand faces real environmental challenges, including the impact of intensive dairy farming on freshwater quality in rivers and streams, the ongoing battle against introduced predators that threaten native birds, and the effects of climate change on glaciers, coastlines, and alpine ecosystems. Conservation is a subject that New Zealanders care about deeply, and there is a lively and ongoing public conversation about how to balance economic development with the protection of the natural environment that is so central to the national identity. The social landscape of New Zealand is also evolving in interesting and important ways. The country has been a pioneer in issues of equality and human rights, going back to the suffrage movement of the 19th century, and it has continued to lead on issues like the decriminalization of same-sex relationships, the legalization of same-sex marriage in 2013, and more recently, the ongoing debate around drug law reform and end-of-life choice legislation. New Zealand has had multiple female prime ministers, including Helen Clark, who led the country from 1999 to 2008 and went on to lead the United Nations Development Program, and Jacinda Ardern, who became one of the most internationally recognized political leaders of her generation during her tenure from 2017 to 2023, particularly for her compassionate and decisive response to the Christchurch mosque shootings of March 2019, in which 51 people were killed by a terrorist. Ardern's response to that tragedy, which included wearing a hijab to meet with the families of victims, pushing through landmark gun reform legislation within weeks of the attack, and refusing to name the perpetrator in order to deny him notoriety, drew global admiration and raised New Zealand's international profile significantly. The relationship between New Zealand and its Pacific Island neighbors is another important dimension of the national identity and international role. New Zealand has close constitutional relationships with the Cook Islands and Niue, which are self-governing nations in free association with New Zealand, meaning their citizens hold New Zealand citizenship and can live and work in New Zealand without restriction. Tokelau is a New Zealand territory. As a result of these connections, as well as historical patterns of migration, New Zealand has a large and growing Pacific Islander community, particularly in Auckland, which is sometimes described as the largest Polynesian city in the world. This Pacific dimension of New Zealand society enriches its culture, its music, its food, and its sense of identity, and it gives New Zealand a unique perspective and voice in regional and global affairs related to the Pacific Ocean, including on issues of climate change, which poses an existential threat to many low-lying Pacific Island nations. New Zealand is also deeply connected to the concept of adventure and outdoor living in a way that goes beyond mere tourism marketing. The culture of outdoor activity is ingrained in the national character. New Zealanders hike, they surf, they ski, they sail, they cycle, and they camp with an enthusiasm and a casualness that reflects both the extraordinary quality of their natural environment and a cultural attitude that places real value on spending time outdoors. The Department of Conservation maintains a network of walking tracks across the country that are collectively world famous among hiking enthusiasts, including the Milford Track, the Rootburn Track, the Kepler Track, and the Abel Tasman Coastal Track, which together make up part of the Great Walks of New Zealand, a curated collection of 9 multi-day hiking experiences set in some of the most spectacular landscapes in the country. These tracks draw tens of thousands of walkers every year from New Zealand and around the world, and they represent a philosophy of making the natural world accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy or the extremely fit. The culture of the great outdoors is not separate from New Zealand identity. It is central to it. From the school children who learn to swim in the ocean and the teenagers who learn to ski on the volcanic slopes of the Central Plateau, to the retirees who walk the Camino or paddle the Wanganui River in their later years. Nature in New Zealand is not a backdrop or a luxury. It is a living part of everyday life, From the ancient migrations of the Maori across the vast Pacific to the Treaty of Waitangi, from the suffragettes who won women the vote to the filmmakers who turned these islands into Middle-earth, from the volcanic plateaus of the North Island to the glaciers and fjords of the South, from the kiwi bird waddling through the night forest to the All Blacks performing the haka before a packed stadium, New Zealand is a country of stories, of beauty, of complexity, and of an enduring human spirit that has made something truly extraordinary out of the raw material of 2 islands at the edge of the world. It is a place that rewards curiosity, that challenges assumptions, and that leaves nearly everyone who encounters it, whether in person or through a screen, with a deep and lasting desire to know more. New Zealand is not just a destination, it is an experience, an idea, and a reminder of what is still possible when people, culture, and nature find a way to coexist with something approaching grace. It is a country that has made mistakes, that carries the weight of a complicated history, that faces real challenges in its present, and that is still, in many ways, a work in progress. But it is also a country of genuine beauty, of remarkable resilience, of deep cultural richness, and of a warmth and openness toward the world that makes it one of the most welcoming places a traveler or a curious mind can encounter. The story of New Zealand is far from finished, and every chapter that comes next will be shaped by the same combination of geography, history, culture, and human spirit that has defined it from the very beginning. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.